Hello and welcome to Inspiring Interviews, Conversations about Breath. This is where we talk to well-known breathwork facilitators about their journey into breathwork. What brought them there? What inspired them? And maybe what they inspire in others as well. Now, I am tremendously excited to be joined today by Suta Rawson. Now, I came across Suta about 2 or 3 months ago, just on a Facebook chat, and I was immediately struck by him when he described himself as running darkness retreats. But Suta does a lot more than that. He has over 20 years experience in the healing arts, and he's led workshops and trainings in 15 countries in Tantra, breathwork, meditation, massage, and transcendence. He offers transformational coaching to individuals and couples. But it's the darkness process that is one of his main passions, and how he uses breath as a divine gift for helping individuals and couples ground, connect, open, and expand. He's very friendly and down to earth, and he knows a lot about Tantra, meditation, and sacred sexuality. So, welcome Suta, to our a little space where we get to inspiring interviews, to conversations about breath. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Ben. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And wow, that's quite an introduction. I've got something to live up to there, so I hope I can manage it. And yeah, I want to thank you for creating this this platform for people who have a passion for breath work and tools of transformation. And I know that you are also really doing some good work in that arena.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. I'll take that. I have to admit that I do this really selfishly because I like to meet interesting people and I like to be inspired. So that's the real reason I do it. If it's okay, can we start our interview taking a breath together, just to really bring us into presence?
Happily.
Okay, let's do that then. And if you're watching this on record or on live, if I manage to get it live, which I'm struggling to do at the moment, I really encourage you to take a breath along with us. So let's do that now. I loved your exhale, by the way. You just let everything go there.
Why not?
You didn't string it out at all. Okay, so before we get into the kind of the meaty and the juicy stuff, Suta, perhaps you could just tell us a few facts about yourself. Tell us your age, where you live. You know, I'm going to give you 1 minute to tell as many facts as you can think of about Suta.
So I'm 51 years old. I live in magical Glastonbury in southwest England. I've been living here for about a year. Before that, I had a period of about 4 years living on Dartmoor, which is a beautiful national park here in southwest England. What else? Oh, there's so many things about being a person. I love love. I love marmalade. I love the breath, and I'm so passionate about the breath. And I think it's such a tremendous blessing and a gift that we are being given by existence. Facts. Well, you covered quite a few things in the introduction. You know, I've been on a healing journey, like consciously on that path for decades, for ever such a long time. And over time, my motive has shifted from being one of kind of trying to fix myself and being desperately unhappy to seeing it as just answering the call of my soul to continue exploring and then sharing the fruits of those explorations with others. I am passionate about music. I love to play guitar and sing, and I'm loving the emergence of spring here in the UK. It's extremely beautiful. And I'm using this extraordinary time that we're all in as a chance, it's a time of great opportunity as I see it, a chance to really slow down and to connect in with what truly matters, and to keep aligning myself ever more deeply with that. But to be honest, that's what my life's been about for a long time. So in many ways, nothing much has changed in that respect.
Okay, there's quite a few little facts in there that I'm going to pick up on. Firstly, it seems we share a love of Dartmoor, which was my home as well for a while.
I didn't know that.
It's been a passionate place of a pilgrimage for me for many years as well. Okay, well, let's begin then. So in these interviews, Suta, I want to inspire people around breathwork. So I want to find out what inspired them. But I'd like to first kind of meet what inspired you as a young person, as a little Suta. And we can go back to any stage that you would like, to your family, maybe to your school. Tell us about, choose an age and tell us about what inspired little Suta.
First thing that comes to mind is being about maybe 10 years old. And I was given a book by someone called Richard Bach. And it was...
Jonathan Livingston CEO?
I think so, yeah. And there was also one he did, Tales of a Reluctant Messiah.
Illusions.
Illusions, yeah. So those two books. So I came across those two books when I was maybe 10 years old. And they really affected me and touched me very deeply. Because already at that age, I was looking around at the behavior of the adults around, and kind of, I was mystified a lot of the time, because what people were saying and how they're behaving didn't really make much sense to me. And oftentimes it wasn't kind of adding up. And so I was left a bit confused by that. And I also, I think my soul found it very hard to land here on earth and to fully incarnate in my body. And so that sense of not quite being here, that continued throughout my teens. So I had a questioning attitude to life, which I really tried to solve in a kind of philosophical way.
Sure.
It's like I was living from the neck up, looking out at life and asking questions and trying to figure it out that way.
Okay. So by 10, Suta was a little bit confused, it sounds like, about the adults around him and with a difficult passage into this life. Can you tell me a little bit more about what life was like then, as a 10-year-old, or even before? What was your family like? What was your environment? Where and how did you grow up?
Sure. So I was growing up in York, in Yorkshire, in England. That was the 1970s. And how would I characterize that time? I think for a long time I felt that people were experiencing a lot of, there was a lot of worry and anxiety around. That was my perception in my family. And of course, I'm coming in as a totally innocent soul, quite open, highly absorbent, and just kind of taking in and absorbing all kinds of things, the seen and the unseen, the spoken and the unsaid, and somehow receiving it all in my sensitivity. And as I said, sometimes that was confusing to me. I couldn't make sense. I was a chronically, and I mean chronically shy child. It was scary and painful for me to meet new people and to be with groups of people. And so that's quite a shift that happened over my life, because, you know, that's mostly what I do, is now work with groups of people.
Yeah.
And I'm often meeting people and having to meet people at a deep level, that people that I've never met before.
Okay, so there you are as a young innocent, born into a family where there is spoken and there is the unspoken of anxiety and worry. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us about your family, if that's okay, and where does that worry and anxiety come from?
So my father was killed in a car crash when I was very young, like a few months old. So in a way, that kind of cast a shadow over my childhood, because obviously that had a great impact on my mother and the other adults around. And of course, it had a big impact on me. And yeah, so I think that's one of the most important parts of the story of what shaped my life.
Yeah.
And shaped this growing person.
Sure, that is a really big event to lose your father, you know, at such a young age. Is this okay to talk about?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I can also still feel like the reverberations of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there will be other people who have lost parents at a young age, and so I know hearing your story around this will be, you know, very powerful for them. And what can you tell us about your father and who he was, and maybe the effect that he had on you, and maybe the effect that he hasn't had on you as well?
So he was a musician, and I mentioned that I love to play guitar and sing. And so the guitar that I have was his guitar. So the music that's made, the resonance, the vibration of that instrument is a kind of link and a connection to him. I'm very blessed that I had two sets of grandparents that I was also spending a great deal of time with as I grew up. So it's like I kind of had three homes and was receiving love in different ways, in different styles, in each one of those. And one of the strongest transmissions of love in my life was through my paternal grandmother, who was an incredible spirit. She passed away a couple of years ago, aged 98. And I still feel her presence very strongly in my life. It's easier for me to talk about her and the other grandparents than my father, because in a way, there's still a sense of an absence there. You know, I didn't know him. So over time, I've done kind of men's work and sort of trying to have a sense of connecting through the ancestors. And so there's been a little bit of that feeling of the connection to him, and then also to his father. Yeah. And so for a long time, especially in my teenage years, and I think it's very common that people go through a kind of rebellion or rejection of the family values during those times. I did. My questioning became more intense in my teenage years. So I had this sense when I was growing up that basically I looked around at the men in Yorkshire in the 1970s, and my strongest feeling was just, I don't want to be like that. It looks like they're living in a straitjacket, in a box. They're not having much fun. They're so emotionally kind of shut down, you know. So that was my primary perception in my teens. And it took me a long time to come to realize, actually, you know, some of the experiences that those men had of, for example, military service and being in the war and being so strongly full of conditioned ideas about what it is to be a man, that even those things, which at some point was kind of something I had to fight against and were difficult for me, that actually they had their own gifts within it, and that there was still a kind of love coming through the best it could through all of those seeming restrictions and limitations. And it took me a long time to come into a space in myself, in my own heart and in my own guts and my own strength, so that I could acknowledge, wow, in his own way, my grandfather was a shaman. You know, he was a boxer, he worked on building sites, he was in the war, so many things I had such strong judgments about. Like, I don't want to be like any of that. And I became a sensitive new age guy. And the distance between us became bigger and bigger and bigger for many years. And it took a lot of my process being a sensitive new age guy and realizing I'm out of balance and turning to face, okay, what is there? What gifts lie in that kind of masculinity, if any? What can I turn to and begin to include and embrace and recognize and just affirm that, you know, those that came before, they're basically, I'm not alive without them. My entire existence is dependent upon them, you know, so I can find some gratitude and appreciation. And then, you know, there's just then something starts to unfold. The love starts to unfold, layers. And that's, you know, that's, there's so much in that process. I've raged, I've cried, I've felt lost. And then there's been those sweet, sweet moments of feeling connection again, whether that's at a distance from them or I come into the same room of them, a little less defended, a little bit more open, and a little bit more kind of ready to listen to who are they? Who is that man? Without me having all my judgments and kind of wishing and hoping that he's going to be somebody else sometime, someday. And he's not, he's him. So can I just like embrace him, this, you know, as is?
We need to take a breath with your grandfather, I think. What was his name?
Walter.
Walter. So the image of him as a boxer working, you know, as such a strong man and a shaman in his own way that you said.
Yeah.
I've got such a clear picture in my head of Walter right now. He sounds amazing. He sounds like a rock, like he's carved out of wood or something.
He was a big guy. He was a big guy, and
well, let's if it's okay, let's just take a breath with Walter and really acknowledge him in you. That was a really interesting, very passionate talk that you just gave there, Suta, because there's two things that I could really hear going on. First of all, there was the young Suta. Now, for his sensitivity and that, you know, young boy, that kind of very, maybe anxious, maybe nervous, but very emotionally aware for a young boy in 1970s Yorkshire, very emotionally aware. You know, so I'm hearing his voice of rejecting that and wanting something different, maybe without any role models or not knowing exactly what that meant. And then I'm hearing you in your power and your authority now, having gone through that process of becoming who you were and then finding balance again by accepting that part of your heritage as well. So I really hear that journey, you know, that journey of what it was like to be young Suta and like looking around. And I'm a 70s child as well. I know what it was like back then as well to feel that it was still post-war. It was still a British society of stiff upper lip about not expressing your emotions.
Sure.
But I have to acknowledge that young Suta here and his emotional sensitivity and his awareness and his rejection that he wanted more than that, or at least he had an idea that there was more than that. So, you know,
I'm
amazing.
really touched by the way that you're hearing me, Ben. It's beautiful how you're really receiving it and then feeding back the different threads. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a story that, you know, it's a mirror. You know, that's why it's a mirror for me. You know, it's not that dissimilar to my journey. So just to go back to little Suta, so that emotional sensitivity you got, you mentioned your paternal grandmother as well. She sounds like she had a big influence on you as well. And this was the wife of your paternal grandfather?
Yeah.
What was her name? And can you tell us a little bit about her?
So she was Lily.
Lily. And your whole face lit up just then when I mentioned her.
So Lily was full of energy, a chatterbox. She loved people. I learned so much about love from her, because, you know, there's a way, again, there was even periods where I kind of had judgments about her, like, oh, she's not so intelligent, and she's this and she's that. But the thing was, in a way, none of that matters, because the most important thing was just the unshakable knowing and foundation that I love her. I love her. It doesn't matter what she was or how she behaved, anything like that. And I could feel that through her own, she had a tremendous spirit. And I think, like many women of her generation, her life choices were somewhat restricted. And yet I always felt very encouraged by her. It's like somehow that encouragement was the transmission of her spirit to mine. Just that she was behind me and she loved me. She might not understand what I'm doing. She might not kind of, you know, it wouldn't be the thing for her to do, but it didn't matter. And there was such a purity and a dynamic energy in that connection with her. And, you know, so they had they had a Sunday roast every Sunday for 70 years. You know, they were married for, I don't know how long it was, 70 years, I think they were, 60 years they were married. And I now find that something so amazing, so worthy of respect. And yeah, so, you know, they had this life that they made together, and it was full of routines and habits and patterns, and yet, and it was of its time, just like we are of this time. And letting that be, letting us be what we are in the potentials of this time, and letting Lily and Walter be that they lived.
That's so beautiful, Suta. Like, to hear how you describe Lily, I hope everyone has Lily in their life. Someone who gave them that gift of just unquestioning love, encouragement. So let's have a breath with Lily as well, because I can feel her in me as well. And I have someone like that for me. I have someone like that. My Auntie Pat was like that.
Yeah.
Again, it could have been you were describing her and my judgments about her. But the gift that she gave me was, you know, uncalculable, that gift of love. I hope that everyone has a Lily in their life. Let's have a breath with her. Okay.
I'm feeling your heart so much as we go on. It's just becoming more and more clear to me. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
No, thank you. You know, and I ask a lot of my interviewees to come up and make themselves vulnerable and to talk about their childhood and what's made them. It's not an easy journey for some people to be able to step into their vulnerability and be strong in that. But I do it because it's inspiring to see Suta. It's inspiring for me, and it's inspiring for the people who will watch this as well. So I have to thank you again for being willing to come on, and without any preparation, really, for going to those tender places, because it makes me cry, and I am crying, and it will other people as well. Okay. Wow. What an interesting childhood then, because there's such emotional literacy and sensitivity, such strong figures in your life, despite not having a father. You know, 70s and 80s in Britain, and Yorkshire as well, which is a famously closed off dour place. That's a great word for it. So tell us how you moved away from that. Let's take you into your teenage years, or maybe your late teenage years. What happened to you then?
So I think it's always funny. I think reality is comprised of the seen and the unseen, the surface and the deep. So it's hard to try to encapsulate all of that.
You can tell us about the simple mechanical things of where you went to and what you did, if that's easier.
Sure. So I came into my teens and I was at a boys' grammar school. And I now consider boys' grammar schools to be, it's not something that I would support generally. I think it's quite an unhealthy environment for a whole load of boys to be together with testosterone exploding and going through all those changes and everything. And so I found that kind of challenging, like to find my place and my way through what it was to make friendships and relate and deal with authority, and to deal with the hierarchies that were existing. As you said, it was still in some ways a very post-war time. People were harking back a lot. I think one of the things that was tremendously influential and painful to me at that time was that I was separated from girls. And, you know, that was, as that, all of that kind of, the changes in sexuality, as that was kind of opening up and flooding through me, and finding no outlet for, like, how could I deal with that, wanting to move and to grow and be expressed through me. And so that was tremendously painful. And, you know, I felt completely both a tremendous interest and fascination about girls, and also absolutely clueless and lost, and like, I just don't know what to do here. I don't know how to even look at a girl or talk to a girl or anything. And so I had a bunch of friends who were all the same. I mean, we were all like that. And of course, you know, then it came to the college years, and then suddenly we were being thrown together and there were girls. And just trying to figure what's a salient point. And if you have a question coming to kind of help focus me, then by all means.
I think many people will be able to relate to that experience of seclusion from the opposite sex, and then suddenly being thrown together, especially as a sensitive and maybe shy young adult. What a turbulent time those teenage years are. So I'm going to have a breath with just feeling that again. And it takes me back as well, which I like. Makes me feel young again, Suta. So where did, so what took you out of Yorkshire then? Because I'm guessing you moved out at some point.
Yeah, that was a little bit later on. So somehow I didn't do as well in my A levels as I expected. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a shock to me. And then I had a few years, I was kind of dossing about, smoking a lot of dope. And but also when I was 19, I had something very powerful happen to me. So at that time, it was a kind of initiation experience. I was 19 and I came into a relationship with a woman who was 33. And when you're 19, that seems like, whoa, much older. And that was a real turning point, because through her and through that relationship, I was reintroduced to the life of the body. And I started to open up emotionally. And then this was the point at which I really became, this is the point at which conscious breathwork entered my life, when I was 19 years old. So I was still feeling in many ways quite messed up in some ways. I felt like the conditioning that I had absorbed had given me a lot of ideas about how to be that were just really screwing me up. They weren't helpful, and especially around sexuality. And I was fascinated by that. And it was so painful to me that I really, really wanted to kind of get a handle on it and to learn and transform. So I took, somehow I found out about this thing, rebirthing. And there was a rebirther in my town. And I got the book called Rebirthing, The Science of Enjoying All Your Life by Jim Leonard and Phil Loud. And I read that book, and that really inspired me tremendously. I sought out a rebirther, and I had my 10 sessions. And those sessions were characterized quite a bit by just struggling to remain conscious, struggling to remain in my body, but sometimes finding that I could land, I could be connected, I could connect to the breath. And through that loving presence of Jane, my rebirther, I was blown away. I was so impressed by the power of this technique. I just felt like, I want to learn more about that. That's absolutely mind-blowing. This is awesome. So I did. I went and I did 2 trainings. I trained with Jim Leonard, who wrote the book, and which was great. He was this real character. He was like a laughing Buddha with a big fat belly. And most of his technique was to tell jokes during the session. And then I also trained with some guys called the Holistic Rebirthing Institute, Lee and Tony Preisler. I don't know if you've heard of them. Beautiful people. And then at that time in the UK, the government were running a scheme called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which was to support people in setting up businesses. So I went on that scheme, and I couldn't call it rebirthing, but I said I was a kind of breath therapist. So it still tickles me to this day that I was getting support from the government to do rebirthing when I was like 20.
Wow. Wow. So that was in the 80s. You know,
that was in the late 80s. Yeah.
And such a young age to have been exposed to this and to start your real journey. Or it feels like before that there was the seeds and there was the readiness, but then you found a path and you found instructors and you found guides and you find people who could show you the way. And to have that awakening, I suppose is the best way to call it. At that young age is quite rare. Most people aren't ready for those kind of
Well, it's
journey at that
amazing
age.
how,
But it seems like you
how
are.
powerful desperation is. I was desperate. I was in a lot of pain, and I was in a lot of pain. I experienced a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion, and I wanted to try to do something about it.
Yeah, pain and desperation. That word desperation. So let's just acknowledge that. So for many people, their early 20s, they're that cusp of being an adult, still not really an adult in their full power, but still not a child, and with the confusion of adolescence behind them is a really difficult time, and it is painful, desperate times for many people. So thank you for just bringing that that gravitas in it. You were desperate and you needed to find something, and then you found it.
Yeah. So then what happened in terms of breathwork, at least, was I did that for about a year. And it was largely through the encouragement of Jim Leonard. And I remember one of the affirmations he used to give was, "I am destined to be one of the most famous rebirthers in the world." So there I am at 19. I am destined to be one of the most famous rebirthers in the world. I'm just thinking, okay, I'll go out and give it a shot. Even though I had virtually no life experience. And I remember that one of my clients in those early days was the principal of a very exclusive private and Catholic boarding college, like very high fees, very prestigious. And the principal was coming to see me. I'm 20, this guy's like 65. And I remember he would cry, tears streaming down his face, and he would look beatific during his sessions. And then he would come back and he would pay me triple what I was asking. And I remember one time I was so touched. He said, in my whole life of spiritual study, I never had such a profound kind of touch of God and the divine as in that session. Now, I can't take the credit for that, but what it points to is the power, the potency of the breath and the technique. So I was just kind of practicing the technique and doing the best I could at that time. And still, some people were having profound experiences.
Oh, so tell us about where your journey led to you after that then.
So then I did finally leave York. Let me see, I would be about 24. I finally went off to university in Manchester as a mature student. And I was doing something called Applied Human Communication. And I loved doing that degree. It was a brand new degree. We were the guinea pig year, and included things like counseling and group work and assertiveness training, as well as more academic aspects like sociology and psychology and linguistics. And so there were many subjects in there that I was really interested in. So that was cool. And being in Manchester at the end of Madchester and the whole rave scene and everything, that was a great place to be a student.
Well, do you know, Suta, I was at Manchester University from 1991 to 94 as well, so I really know what you went through then.
Yeah, man. Cool.
Going down to Hacienda. I used to do that. I studied anthropology there. So again, it was a niche subject. It
Yeah.
was a very eye-opening about consciousness and about culture and how that changes as well. So that was a very powerful time for me as well. Okay, so your degree course sounded like really strongly aligned to who you were at that point. For many people, they don't know who they are when they go to university, but it sounds you had really already found your calling and your pathway.
Yeah, it was good. It was really good. Another stream to the story that I'd like to add in that was happening already was that I'd trained in massage,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd encountered the teachings of a guy called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, also known as Osho. Yeah, and so that was very influential in my life. Part of the thing that I recognized was that I wanted to come more into my body, and that the body held a great key, was a portal to becoming whole. So I trained in, and the first time I had a massage was as strong as the first time I had a breathwork session. It blew my mind. I thought, my God, I need to learn how to do this. So I did. And then I did a lot of breathwork trainings, got involved in the Osho world. And then I also, partly through being in Manchester and going clubbing and everything, I got really into dance and movement, creative movement. So I was doing 5 rhythms classes a couple of times a week. I was training in something called the Anna Halperin method of and like authentic movement. So I was doing a lot of this kind of stuff, dancing, body work. And after I finished my degree, a magical series of events led to me coming to live in an Osho center, where I lived for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I continued working in that place. That it had a spa and meditation center attached to it. So I worked as a body worker, doing massage and healing as my livelihood for about, I don't know, 15 years.
Mm.
And I saw 10,000 people in that time, doing one-to-one sessions. Basically, you know, I've always just shared the things that really work for me.
Mm.
So then it's like, I'm coming from a kind of lived experience.
Yeah.
So if something touches me deeply, then I want to share that with others and pass it on, and hope they can also touch somebody else really deeply.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really feel that. And that's, you know, not uncommon. We become teachers of the things that we most need ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
the healing that we have, we then, you know, need to bring out to others. Okay, well, you've mentioned Osho. Let's just touch briefly on that, because for many people, when they hear the word Osho or, you know, Rajneesh, they'll have a very clear idea of what that is, about, you know, ideas of being in a cult, about sexual freedom and liberation, and again, everything that happened, you know, in North America, all the bad things about that. But it sounds like it was just a positive experience for you.
It was a very positive experience for me. Yeah. I met people who were tremendously creative, very loving. I think that the meditation methods that Osho devised is like a kind of genius, really. You know, specifically kind of updating meditation for modern humans and the kind of lifestyles and stresses that we are subject to. So I'm really grateful for what came through him and what he created. However, I find that I can't just swallow the package whole. I think it's beautiful when people have a devotional heart and they can be devotees, completely give themselves over to something. I, however, believe that having the discerning aspect of mind is really a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's always good to think for oneself, to question authority. And so, you know, I'm not, I'm not blind to the criticisms that are made of any religious or spiritual movement, including Osho.
Yeah.
Even though I love it and I gained so much from it, and I was immersed in that world for a while.
I can completely relate to that as well. For a different tradition, I was a Buddhist for a long time, and I studied Tibetan Buddhism and Dharma. But again, there's an institutional shadow that comes with large organized spirituality or religion as well, that whilst you can recognize the value of the teachings, it doesn't mean that you have to accept everything about it, and there are things that you can take away with it as we move on ourselves. So I completely understand with that as well. You mentioned God there and the divine. Would you be willing to talk about that and tell us about your relationship with God or the divine? Because again, that's another subject for most people. They hear the word God and they'll run a mile. So tell us about your relationship with the divine.
Over these last years, I would say that's been the foremost thread in my life. And that's such a shift from those teenage times where part of my rejection of the mainstream culture around me was absolute rejection of religion and Christianity and the church. But then when I came to encounter a different way of receiving the message of someone like Jesus, I was really tremendously touched by some of the stories and teachings. And it's been quite a process, and to get to feel completely comfortable, in fact, to love the word God and what that means to me and what I feel it's pointing to. And so it's hard. Part of what that is, I believe, is that there's a mystery. That life is ultimately a mystery. We don't really know what's going on. Nobody. And I've sat with so-called enlightened teachers, and you know, I have followed enlightened teachers around. I worked with somebody who says, for years, I worked with somebody who will say, I am enlightened. Somebody who was very close to Osho. And to me, God is that is both the deepest of the deep and yet sort of ever present in everything, including this very air and this breath. And that everything that we have and experience, I believe, is a kind of gift given to us. So this computer screen, this shirt, the internet, neither you nor I know how to create those things ourselves. Yet here we are using them. The chair I'm sitting on, the food that I've eaten, the air that I'm breathing, this moment that sustains me, that sustains you, and that sustains anyone who watches this video. We, as this person, none of us created that. We just find ourselves in this amazing world that's so rich, providing so much, so many experiences and objects for us to experience and to delight in and to use and to further evolve. So I believe that there is an evolutionary impulse that plays throughout life. It lives in me, it's living in you, and it's kind of impulsing us from somewhere deep inside to create. And that's ultimately mysterious, and it precedes me, and it will live on after I'm gone, and it's just so awesome to me. It's way bigger and more powerful than I am, and vast, and yet there's nowhere where I see that it's not. And of course, there are times where I'm contracted and I'm defended, and I'm really identifying with the small me, my personality and my story and my emotions and my feelings that contract me into a smaller place of defense and protection. Then I feel disconnected. Then, like many people, I can feel a bit lost, or I can no longer see, either with my eyes of appreciation or the eyes of the heart. I can no longer see God. And if people are offended or don't like that word, then substitute it for your own word that makes sense to you. That may be spirit or higher consciousness or the life force, whatever speaks to you of the source or the ultimate.
I love how you have brought the sacred into every day. I am just sensing so much awe and wonder in how you speak, Suta. And it is that awe and wonder. There's so much in what you just said here that that was just beautiful to hear. God is deep. God is still here and around everything. It is inspiring us. It's flowing through us. That was a beautiful speech you just gave there, to recognize how awesome and how wonderful our lives really is, and how it is everything that it is. You said also that it's in this, God is in the space in between us, and I can feel that, Suta. I can feel that right now. You know, my teacher, one of my teachers, Anthony, he always talks about, do you know the graphic that you have two faces in silhouette, two black faces on a white background? And it's a visual trick, because it's not just two faces, but it's a chalice as well. It's a vase.
Yes.
And he says, the space in between, what is the space that you are creating between you and someone else? Is it a chalice? Is it a place? Is it something that you can fill with love?
I like that.
And I'm feeling this is a space that I would just like to recognize and acknowledge that God, or the divine, or the higher consciousness, whatever word works for you, is here as well. And I can feel it. I can feel it right here now, Suta.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Should we have a breath with that? And if you're watching this, and if you can feel God or the divine or spirit, breathe us and just feel how fucking amazing that really is, to be able to be aware of that.
Fucking amazing. Yeah.
Let's have a breath with that then.
So, I just feel that the breath, each breath, the air, the atmosphere, the intelligence, that's more than just a chemical exchange of oxygen and nitric oxide, carbon dioxide, all of that chemistry that's so fascinating and is clearly real and a big component of what's happening in breath, that exchange that's happening. But there's also spiritual principles at play through that as well. And so whether we call it prana, chi, life force, whatever, to me, that's also this gift. It's like it's an effervescent, sparkling, alive life force that's like, I always say, often say when I'm working with people and I'm meeting a group for the first time, well, the one thing I know about every one of you, even if I've never spoken to you and it's the first time I'm seeing you, is in here, there's a heart beating. And that heart beating is fed by this very atmosphere that we all partake of. And every human partakes of that atmosphere. The whole field of life on earth partakes of that, is dependent on that. That's something that we truly need. If it goes, we're dead in no time. So that's a true need. And I think it's really worth, especially at times like this extraordinary time, which I know many people find very challenging. But it's one opportunity at this time is to really get a sense of clarity about what has true value and what really matters. And I think what really matters is to have good, clean air and sunlight, the elements, and the flow that happens through us coming together, through human connection, human contact. And that's like for the expression of love and for our consciousness and our awakeness to be in a kind of conversation. And that conversation is like it happens between me and you and between human beings. But in a way, there's a conversation happening between us and everything, between us and reality. Reality is responsive and alive, and it's got its own consciousness. And I think that God flirts with us in a way. It's kind of saying, here I am. Can you see me? Can you see me in this beauty? Can you see me in this play of light? Can you see me in this bird song? Maybe even in the things that maybe look kind of, that we might think, oh, that's ugly. Oh, that person's being an idiot or dumb. Can we still find it in our heart and in our higher consciousness to perceive that love is playing here too?
To be able to perceive that love is playing here too. That's a beautiful sentiment. We are not going to be able to squeeze all this in, Suta. I'm going to have to ask you back.
Okay.
Because, you know, in your life story, we've really only got to about halfway in your 30s, you know, having worked as a body therapist, having worked in Osho. We've touched on, you know, your relationship and your passion for being aware of the divine, of the sacred, of God in every breath that you take. But there's so much more that we haven't covered that I want to hear about. I want to hear about your journey through Tantra. I want to hear about your darkness and your darkness process and the retreats, because I feel that I know that they have so much value. And I know that there's a story in there as well. So will you come back again for another interview for part 2?
Oh, gladly. You know, I've been... this is our first meeting, and as I said before, I could really sense your heart ever more as we went on, and the way that you listen, and you know, you really surprised me by like where you were encouraging me to go to, and that's really refreshing. And I sincerely wish that anybody who tunes in has also felt some of that and tasted some of that.
They will, Suta, because your passion is extraordinary, you know, and I can sit and listen to you for hours because I'm feeling, wow, this is just amazing. So, you know, I can't see how anyone watching this will not be inspired by hearing your voice and your story and your journey. And there is just so much more to hear from you, which I can't wait to do. Okay, well, listen, what do we need to do? We need to take a breath together, I think, and we just acknowledge that this is just part one, because there's so many more questions that I want to ask you about. You know, we've heard who inspired you when you were young, your grandparents. I want to hear about who inspires you now. But I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll take a breath, and then we'll finish. What would you like to inspire in other people, Suta?
One thing that I want to be a voice for is, in a way, goes against much of the stream of the modern world, which seems to be about bigger, better, faster, more. And what I want to be a voice for is finding contentment, true, like quiet, I call it quiet joy, with less, in the small things, to slow down. You don't have to do so much. How would it be for you to rest back into your being, to find a way to speak to yourself more kindly and with more compassion? I think that would change the quality of most people's lives tremendously if they could be more of a friend to themselves. And that part of that involves doing something which is, instead of keeping busy and distracted and kind of running away from something which keeps us on the surface of things, instead take courage, slow down, and turn to face what's in our inner world and our inner space. And if we can, to meet that with good heart, and to find that in the heart that goes, yes, I have space for you. I have space for this. And it may be that we have to embrace some things that we've been running from: pain, numbness, shattered dreams, grief, bereavement. And that by including that, it's giving the chance for an upwelling of our soul, and actually it enriches us. Just as you have been calling out and encouraging vulnerability in me and in the other speakers that come, that vulnerability is such a part of us having real connection. And when we experience real connection, we know it, and there's something so true in that. And, you know, like those old values of the good, the true, the beautiful, I think they're timeless. So, yeah, something like that.
The good, the true, the beautiful, quiet joy with feeling everything in ourselves. And as you were speaking, Suta, it felt to me that you weren't just speaking to me, that you were speaking to the little Suta, the quiet, shy boy with anxiety, surrounded by anxiety, but also that a very emotionally sensitive boy who was maybe a bit quieter as well. I could feel him. I could feel you holding his hand as well as you spoke. So let's
And
take a breath.
also that in others,
In
like,
others.
yes, I through being able to hold that in me, then to recognize it, I can see the pain that people are under. I can see the stress that people are under, their struggles and hardships. And then to find a way to hold that, to me, that is soul work.
Mm-hmm.
That's increasingly what I'm about. And I'm less interested these days in kind of rah, rah. It's great to get motivated. And I also hope that we can find ways that elders and the deep, that although it speaks in a different tone and a different pace and rhythm, that people can also find an ear for that and let that touch them and land in them and do its work.
Well, let's have a breath with that, shall we? And if you're watching this, please join in with us. Thank you, Suta. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.